Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Michael Walker and I'm joined by Ash Sarkar. Ash, how are you doing?
I'm delighted to have you back. There's only one Michael Walker, as they sing on the football terraces of nowhere.
Yeah, the football. I don't think I get mentioned much on football terraces. It is good to be back. I'll explain where I've been in one moment. First of all, we have a packed show today. Global financial markets have gone into a tailspin as Trump doubles down on his trade war. I have an interview with Yanis Varoufakis for you on that. People very close to Trump are also having second thoughts about their president, including billionaire Bill Ackman and potentially even Elon Musk. Will they be able to bring some reason to the man they put into the White House? And in the second half of the show, we have two stories on Palestine. So the first is the case of the two Labour MPs deported from Israel, a move which Kemi Badenoch welcomed. The second is on a case being brought against 10 British nationals for committing alleged war crimes in Gaza. We have interviews with the lawyers behind the case. Before we get started, though, I did want to explain where I've been for the past few weeks. So I've been on bereavement leave because exactly 4 weeks ago, my mum passed away. Now, I won't talk about her much in detail in case I get emotional, but she was very brilliant. She died suddenly and unexpectedly of a stroke. So I was away because I needed time to grieve and also to help arrange the funeral. Now, as I say, I won't talk about it much, but I thought it was important to recognise how lucky I am to work at an organisation that allowed me proper time to get over my loss and to thank Stephen for very capably filling in my shoes. It's important to note, and outrageously, I think there is currently no legal right whatsoever to bereavement leave for anyone other than parents of children under 18 who die. And even then, so it's probably the worst experience anyone can ever go through. They only get 2 weeks. That should obviously be changed. Of course, if you're watching this and you employ people, please do allow them time to grieve if and when it's needed. I don't know how I would have coped without my time off. Let's get straight into our first story. Donald Trump has pledged he won't back down on implementing steep tariffs against American allies and rivals alike, and the financial markets don't like it. East Asian markets were the first to open today. Companies listed on the Japanese stock exchange fell by 7% this morning, meaning they're now down 13% since Trump introduced tariffs last week. The Shanghai index, which shows the aggregate value of companies listed on China's biggest stock exchange, was down 7% today, and the Hong Kong index fell by 13% this morning. That's the single biggest drop in a day since 2008. The hit to companies listed on East Asian stock exchanges is perhaps not a surprise. These are all countries which export lots to the United States, and if those exports are blocked, the profits of firms in those countries will obviously suffer. European stocks, though, have also taken a hit today. The Stoxx 600 is the composite of the 600 most significant companies in the European Union, and their combined value fell by 4.5% today, and the index is now almost 12% lower than it was before Trump's tariffs were introduced. The British version of the Stoxx 600 is the FTSE 100. That's our 100 most significant companies. The FTSE lost 4.38% on its value today. It's now lost over 10% since Trump's tariffs were introduced. So this is a bad day. It's been a bad weekend for the values of companies in Asia and in Europe. Now, that, of course, won't bother Donald Trump, who thinks we've all been taking the US for a ride anyway. We're just getting our just desserts. Unfortunately for Trump, though, the United States is not coming off unscathed. The S&P is the index of the value of 500 of America's most important companies. It's down 11% since Trump's tariffs were introduced. Now, that's partly due to Trump's tariffs provoking reciprocal tariffs from countries like China, which will damage American exporters. More significantly, though, it's because of the negative impact Trump's tariffs will have on the supply chains of American firms, pushing up the costs of production for them, especially companies like Apple that use lots of production from China. It's also because of the negative impact higher prices will have on consumers. And that has led Goldman Sachs to say that there is now a 45% chance of the United States entering a recession in the next 12 months. So the impact of Trump's Liberation Day doesn't look so liberating. Speaking on Air Force One over the weekend, though, Trump suggested he's not afraid of a little pain.
Is there pain in the market? At some point, you're unwilling to tolerate this idea of a Trump put. Is there a threshold?
I think your question is so stupid. I mean, I think I don't want anything to go down. But sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something. And we have such a horrible, we have been treated so badly by other countries because we had stupid leadership that allowed this to happen. They took our businesses, they took our money, they took our jobs, they moved it to Mexico, they moved it to Canada, they moved a lot of it to China, and it's not sustainable. We're not going to do it. Now we have hundreds of billions of dollars that's pouring into our country. On a monthly basis, it's pouring, it's already started because I put tariffs on. Then eventually it's going to straighten out and our country will be solid and strong again.
Now, Trump talked about hundreds of billions of dollars flooding in to America. Now, that could be a reference to two different things. So first, Trump hopes that his tariffs will fill the coffers of the federal government, which it could do to some degree, even if it's at the expense of consumers. So obviously, if people have to pay tariffs, then that does go to the US government. The other hope Trump will have is that the tariffs will encourage firms to produce goods in the United States so they don't have to face tariffs. So instead of producing in China or Vietnam, they say, let's bring the factories back to America. That seems to be what he wants. And the problem there is that investment like that requires long-term horizons. And no one has any idea what he's going to do next, right? So would you invest millions to build a factory in a country with that guy in charge, right? You don't know if the tariffs are going to be the same in 2 weeks' time, let alone 2 years. It doesn't seem appealing to me. Anyway, back to the crash in the stock market. Now, I wanted to find someone to interview who could put this in the perspective of recent history, and who better to call upon than former Greek Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis. He had a front row seat for the 2008 global financial crisis, and especially its aftermath and the euro crisis. And I wanted to know how he thought the movements in the stock market over the past 5 days compared.
2008 was our generation's 1929, so nothing compares with that in terms of the catastrophic magnitude of the shock. And also, remember, 2008 was utterly unexpected. It wasn't planned. It wasn't designed. Trump's shock is a designer shock. He chose it. So in that sense, I think we need to compare it to the events of the 15th of August, 1971, the Richard Nixon shock, which was an attempt, just like Trump is attempting to upend the world economic system. Richard Nixon did exactly the same thing with enormous success, I have to say, not from the perspective of the peoples of the world, not even the American working class or middle class, but from the perspective of those in Washington, D.C. and Camp David, to be more precise, for that summer's day in 1971, whose job was, or whose remit was, to extend American hegemony in an era when America had become a deficit country. So there are many similarities with 1971.
Let's talk about what the headlines have all been about this weekend, which is the stock markets and their crash, sort of falling between sort of 5 and 15%. Should Novara media viewers care if the stock market is taking a hit?
Well, in the same way that Novara media audiences have no right to rejoice when the markets go through the roof. We don't have the right to take their collapse or temporary fall as a sign that all hell is coming loose. Look, the manner in which stock exchanges and money markets progress is highly divorced from the way in which humanity progresses. So there may be a coincidence of exuberance or disaster, but it's just a coincidence. Very often, when the stock exchanges are celebrating, the vast majority of the population are suffering, and vice versa. So the big question here is this. What has been happening since 1971, between 1971 and today, is a very significant class war against the working class of the United States, the working class of Britain, the working class of Germany, the working class of China, waged by an interesting coalition between American rentiers who no longer wished to be capitalists. They were happy simply to collect rents through the financial sector, through private equity, through big tech, and the capitalists of Germany, the capitalists of Japan, and the capitalists of China. The status quo that the radical center is lamenting today, because it is true that the Trump shock is a major blow at this liberal order. The status quo that they've been lamenting has been a highly, grossly imbalanced one where inequality has been rising triumphantly at the expense of the capacity of most people to imagine that the world would be better for their children than it is for them. So this is what the status quo is. It could get worse. There's no doubt about that. Mrs. Thatcher taught me as a young man that when you think that things can't get worse, they do. But the interesting question is now, take China, for instance. Is China going to respond to Trump by raising the living standards of the Chinese so that they can consume more of the stuff that so far has been going to the United States in the form of net exports? Will they find some way of communicating with the inane Europeans who seem to have absolutely no idea of what is going on? Or is Europe and China going to engage in a tariff war between them as the European Union tries to impede the diversion of China's net exports from the United States to Europe? So it will all depend on that. And unfortunately, the majority of people out there, whether we're talking about the United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, Spain, have no say in very significant decisions that will determine whether the shock of Donald Trump can become a force for good or another force that enhances inequality and diminishes their prospects.
Let's now move to your history as a game theorist. I know that's something you specialised in, or probably do still specialise in as an economics professor. Obviously, people know you more now as a former Greek finance minister, but that's where you made your name as far as I understand it. How should countries be responding to Trump's tariffs? According to game theory, you've got an opportunity, haven't you, as a government, to say, we won't respond, we'll take the tariffs and we'll try not to retaliate because that could just make things worse. Or you can say, Trump, you've introduced these tariffs, we're going to raise you. Maybe we'll put tariffs on you that are even higher than what you've done to us to show we mean business. What should governments around the world, be they in Beijing or Brussels or London, what should they be doing now?
Well, you don't need to be a mathematician or a chess master to know that when you're running a major surplus, trade surplus with a country like the United States, and you have somebody like Trump prepared to take the tariff war to its logical conclusion, that you can't win that war. If I am selling stuff to you and you're not selling stuff to me, then there's no way I can use tariffs against you. I will run out of things to tariff well before you do, and I will lose. It really is a no-brainer, as I would say. So what should you do? It depends on, the United Kingdom is quite different to the European Union. And, it's interesting, isn't it, that Donald Trump, who really loves Brexit because he hates the European Union, has created this wedge, 20% tariffs for the European Union, 10% for the UK, which, by the way, if any strong supporters of the United Kingdom return to the European Union are listening, this was a Trump strategy by which to make sure that Britain never returns to the single market or to the customs union, because who would dare do that when you have this wedge? But setting that aside, the European Union and China are in a similar situation because they are both running very large trade surplus with the United States. So if I'm right that you cannot win a trade war when you're in that position, well, don't retaliate. The best strategic response to retaliation is not to retaliate. And to do what instead? You have to do something. Well, you have to blow up your own economic model. Because both Germany, and when we're talking about European Union, we're really talking about Germany. This is the steam engine of the Eurozone, of the European Union. Both Germany and China have based their development model on net exports, which is exactly at the same time, it's not just net exports of what? Not just goods, Mercedes-Benzes and BYDs and all that. You're also exporting deflationary forces to the deficit country. Well, that business model is now finished because you have Trump who says, no, I'm going to tariff you to extinction. It can't work. So what is the alternative? The alternative is to invest in your own country. In the European Union, we haven't had any net investment for the last 15 years. So the obvious answer is not, of course, to invest in armaments, because this is a fool's wager. Only the United States can have a military-industrial complex that operates as an engine of growth, because they have one war after the other. Is this what Europe is going to do? It used to be a peace project. What Europe needs is investment in the technologies that it has missed out on. Batteries, solar power, green energy generally, algorithmic capital, what I call cloud capital. And you need a large-scale investment program, something like 700, 800 billion a year. Do that, and then your reliance on the United States shrinks. Your capacity to keep up with the Chinese increases, and you stop being a sorry, idiotic continent. This is what Europe should be doing. China should introduce a basic wage, a basic income for its citizens. I've been advocating that with my Chinese friends, and I will continue to do so. So forget tariffs. When you're in a surplus position, you can't win that war. Look inside your own political economy and rebalance it away from the ruling class towards investment, and investment not only in the conditions of the working class, but also in your technology.
That was Yanis Varoufakis speaking to me earlier today. And we, in fact, spoke for quite a bit longer than that about his perspectives on Trump's trade wars. And we'll be putting out that full interview tomorrow. So do look out for that. For now, we're going to stay on the stock market for a minute, because something pretty weird happened after we spoke to Yanis. In a sign of just how volatile things are at the moment, a random account on Twitter seems to have caused a major move in the American stock market earlier today. So Walter Bloomberg, who appears to just post financial news lines and happens to have a surname that's similar to a very prestigious financial outlet, tweeted out that the director of the National Economic Council, Kevin Hassett, had said Trump was considering a 90-day pause on tariffs for all countries except China. Now that was fake news, but it still appeared on Bloomberg Terminal, so the actual Bloomberg, and US broadcaster CNBC made an actual headline on one of their morning programs. And because of that, the Dow Jones and the NASDAQ, so two of the other big American indexes, they both surged rapidly upwards in response to the rumor, only to plunge back into negative territory once the White House denied it. This is all very reassuring. We can see that the efficient market hypothesis is playing out, because it's going up by hundreds of billions on the basis of a random tweet on X. Also concerning, the White House has responded to China's decision to retaliate to US tariffs by imposing its own 34% levies to a range of American imports. That was China's retaliation, and Trump has now said he'll hit China with an additional 50% tariff unless the country backs down by tomorrow. If Trump were to go ahead with that threat, US tariffs on Chinese goods could amount to as much as 104%. Now, that's sort of the nuclear button when it comes to a trade war. One company that won't be celebrating that news is Apple. Their supply chains are especially based in China. I think the majority of the parts for an iPod, and not an iPod, what decade am I living in, an iPhone or a MacBook comes from China. This would really dramatically hit production of iPhones and MacBooks, and their stock price is now 20% below where it was this time last week. So you can see they're 5.89% down today. If you look at where it is over 5 days, it's about 20% down. That's about $500 billion wiped away. Right? You remember Tim Cook was sitting there at Trump's inauguration looking fairly happy with himself. The company now worth 20% less than it was when that guy entered the White House. In 2024, Donald Trump was remarkably successful at getting wealthy businessmen to back him. After the stock market crash caused by his tariffs, though, some are now having second thoughts. Bill Ackman is a billionaire investor who became one of Trump's loudest supporters before the election. This is what he said late last year.
We're stepping into, I would say, the most pro-growth, pro-business, pro-American administration I've perhaps seen in my adult lifetime, certainly. We just had a nice little ceremony, and CEOs of broad array of big American companies, and I would say everyone is incredibly enthusiastic, really about a new administration that's about efficiency, removing the impediments to growth, deregulation.
Everyone's just so excited for a Trump presidency. Ackman, though, now has changed his mind. He's not smiling. So he's tweeted, "I just figured out why Howard Lutnick is indifferent to the stock market and the economy crashing. He and Cantor are long bonds. He profits when our economy implodes. It's a bad idea to pick a Secretary of Commerce whose firm is levered, long fixed income. It's an irreconcilable conflict of interest." So Howard Lutnick is Trump's Commerce Secretary. Cantor is Howard Lutnick's hedge fund. That hedge fund has invested in government bonds. I'm unpicking this tweet for you. Government bonds, the key detail here, they always go up in value during times of economic disruption because they're considered safe. So people say, if the stock market's going down, where can we put our money that's safe? Let's put it in government bonds. Because while the value of companies can go down, the American government is always going to pay you back if you lend it money. Ackman is now suggesting that Lutnick could be intentionally crashing the economy to make a tidy profit. Oh, how times change. So enthusiastic back then, encouraging people. Well, Donald Trump had just been elected then, but before that, he was campaigning for Donald Trump. Now he's saying, not only is Donald Trump making bad policy, but Donald Trump is so corrupt that his commerce secretary is intentionally crashing the economy just to make a few bucks. Elon Musk, of course, is another billionaire who backed Donald Trump. Now he's in the Trump administration, heading up Doge. But he also seems upset with Trump's trade war. And today, posted a curious clip on X of arch free trader Milton Friedman.
There's not a single person in the world who could make this pencil. Remarkable statement? Not at all. The wood from which it's made, for all I know, comes from a tree that was cut down in the state of Washington. To cut down that tree, it took a saw. To make the saw, it took steel. To make the steel, it took iron ore. This black center, we call it lead, but it's really graphite, compressed graphite. I'm not sure where it comes from, but I think it comes from some mines in South America. This red top up here, the eraser, bit of rubber, probably comes from Malaya, where the rubber tree isn't even native. It was imported from South America by some businessmen with the help of the British government. This brass ferrule, I haven't the slightest idea where it came from, or the yellow paint, or the paint that made the black lines, or the glue that holds it together. Literally thousands of people cooperated to make this pencil. People who don't speak the same language, who practice different religions, who might hate one another if they ever met. When you go down to the store and buy this pencil, you are in effect trading a few minutes of your time for a few seconds of the time of all those thousands of people. What brought them together and induced them to cooperate to make this pencil? There was no commissar sending out orders from some central office. It was a magic of the price system, the impersonal operation of prices that brought them together and got them to cooperate to make this pencil so that you could have it for a trifling sum. That is why the operation of the free market is so essential, not only to promote productive efficiency, but even more, to foster harmony and peace among the peoples of the world.
Now, we don't normally show you clips of Milton Friedman extolling the virtues of free markets and sort of dissing socialism. But it was interesting because Elon Musk tweeted that out today. And of course, you could say that pencil produced by workers and machines in so many countries may have been much more expensive if at each stage, each of those companies had to pay very high tariffs. Ash, the timing of that tweet from Elon Musk seemed very pointed. There'll be lots of people sort of on Wall Street hoping that the billionaires who backed Donald Trump are now going to rein him in. What do you see happening here?
Well, I do love it when the ruling class fights, Michael. I've got to say, I enjoy it the way I would a heavyweight boxing match. The first thing to say is that because Donald Trump has been so electorally successful, particularly with this second administration, it's easy for that success to paper over the fissures and the divisions within his own, not just electoral coalition, but the, oligarchs and plutocrats who surround him. We saw it relatively early on in his administration, with Elon Musk being on one side of the, the H-1B visa, which basically meant that you could have tech workers coming over from India and working in the States. You had Elon Musk and others who are sort of associated with Silicon Valley on one side that are pro H-1B visa, and you had others like Steve Bannon, most notably, who are more connected to, I suppose, the blue collar base from which Donald Trump is seeking votes, saying no, you have to get rid of it. It's not surprising to me that tariffs, the end of so-called free trade. One of the things we know about free trade is that it's nothing but it's often been exported by America at the barrel of a gun. But the end of the so-called free trade era is unappealing to some of Trump's supporters, depending on how exposed they are to the economic volatility that's going to result from this tariff policy. What's interesting, going back to Bill Ackman and saying, Lutnick's all in longs, and so this is a conflict of interest. Is the bit he's not saying is that, well, maybe because you're on the losing side of this. Of course, Bill Ackman is a billionaire hedge funder, Pershing, I believe it's called, Pershing Square Capital Management. That's exactly the kind of, big private equity fund, which is getting, hit twice over. One is obviously because of, the downturn in the stock market. And the other is that you have big investors pulling out of private equity, and have been for the last few days, because the thing they're seeking is liquidity. So that's, depending on what end of the investment portfolio you're on, you can have different billionaires with different levels of exposure. Similarly, when it comes to Elon Musk, one of the things which is so endlessly entertaining about him is that he's just such he operates with such naked self-interest. So he was in favor of some degree of protectionism when it came to restricting the access that Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers would have to the American market. Why? Because it would massively undercut Tesla. And then suddenly, when you've got this set of tariffs, which are much more blanket and obviously are going to have some impact on, the value of his investments. Oh, no, he's a free marketeer. These people don't want an equal playing field where all can compete against all. Another reason why Elon Musk was so interested in that Wisconsin judicial race, his side lost, by the way, was perhaps because, the state of Wisconsin was not allowing Tesla to have a sweetheart deal where they got to opt out of rules that would govern other local car dealerships. So, you scratch a free marketer, what you find is nothing but naked self-interest, rules for thee and not for me. And what we're seeing is how, suddenly great moralists and philosophers are made of these men when it's their investments which are losing value.
I suppose Bill Ackman would say, I don't know much about his business interests, but he'd say he gets rich when the economy grows, and Lutnick gets rich when the economy crashes. And so he'd say, that's why you should trust me and not that guy. Although I can see actually later today, he actually said it was unfair for him to lash out at Howard Lutnick. So someone's been in touch with him and saying this is very embarrassing for your friend Trump. And, the nasty Democrats, they'd increase your taxes. So you shouldn't dare criticize this man. Or maybe actually that Trump was going to lash out at some of his business interests. On the issue of sort of the stock market. So I asked Yanis whether Novara media viewers should care if the stock market is declining. I thought his answer was very interesting. One person that, historically has cared is Donald Trump. So throughout his whole first term, he would sort of be constantly bragging in press conferences, everything is good, I'm a brilliant president because the stock market is going up. Do you think that sort of this situation where the stock market is rapidly sort of falling can continue, or do you think that Trump will try and fashion some kind of U-turn at some point? Obviously, he won't call it a U-turn. He'll say, oh, I've actually achieved a stunning victory. I've taken away these tariffs because Europe has agreed to get rid of one particular rule and regulation or whatever. You know what he did sort of originally with Canada and Mexico? He said they've agreed to stop the fentanyl coming across the border, therefore I'm going to lower the tariff. Do you think that if this continues, he will fashion a U-turn, even though he'll disguise it as victory?
I mean, look, he may do. There's one thing that I try not to do, and that's predict what Donald Trump is going to do next, because I think he also feels that his own power resides in unpredictability and volatility. There's this brilliant bit in Marx's 18th Brumaire where he talks about Napoleon being like the juggler who has to keep attention on himself by creating ever more chaotic situations. I think that's Donald Trump. So I'm not going to try and predict where he's going to go next. But I think, just to go back to the start of your question, when you pointed out that one of the things that he said during his first administration was, look at the stock market. The stock market's never been greater. It's never been bigger. Line goes up. So beautiful. And the sort of markedly different tone and posture and policy agenda that he's pursuing now. Asted Herndon, who is a political reporter for the NYT, I think put it very, very well, which is the theme of the second Trump administration is retribution. And for, the MAGA faithful who feel that they were hard done by and, persecuted and oppressed over the Biden years, for them to feel that they are getting vengeance of some kind. And that's becomes much more important to Trump than catering to the median voter. And I think once you understand that, decisions like this begin to make sense. It also, I think, coheres with something which has been remarkably consistent on Trump's part, singularly consistent on Trump's part, which is how he thinks about the world and how he thinks about financial exchange. And the way in which I summed it up in last Friday's Cortado was break bones, exert leverage, and remember there's no such thing as an equal partner. So the way in which he views these tariffs is that it's sweeping, it's punishing, and it's going to bring other countries squealing to the negotiating table to offer concessions which are ultimately going to be favorable to America or to, the section of capital that Trump himself, represents. Yes, that doesn't rule out that he might, try and spin a climb down or a backtrack as some kind of glorious victory. That's, again, something that he does. But I do just think that it's consistent with his way of doing business.
2 British lawmakers have been deported by Israel. Labour MPs Abtissam Mohammed and Yuan Yang, who's been on this show actually, had travelled to the country as part of an MP's delegation visiting humanitarian aid projects and communities in the West Bank. But on arrival, they were detained and then deported by the Israeli government, justifying the expulsion, or trying to justify the expulsion. Israel's immigration ministry accused the MPs of coming to the country to, quote, document the activities of the security forces and spreading anti-Israel hatred. How dare anyone document the actions of the Israeli security forces? The British government immediately described the action as disgraceful, and that's the action of deporting them, not the MPs going there in the first place, although you would have to wonder, wouldn't you, with this government? Anyway, Foreign Secretary David Lammy said this: "It is unacceptable, counterproductive and deeply concerning that 2 British MPs on a parliamentary delegation to Israel have been detained and refused entry by the Israeli authorities. I have made clear to my counterparts in the Israeli government that this is no way to treat British parliamentarians." Now, you would think that other British lawmakers would object to 2 MPs being detained and then ejected by a country that's supposed to be our ally. This should be pretty clear cut. And that's why Labour were able to be fairly strong on this, right? It didn't actually affect the rights of Palestinians, which they struggle with. It affected the rights of MPs, which they are more than willing to stand up for. Not Tory leader Kemi Badenoch, though. Speaking to BBC's Laura Koonsberg, she gave her take on the case.
The government has said it was unacceptable, but do you think that Israel was entitled to do what they did? What's your view?
Countries should be able to control their borders. What I think is shocking is that we have MPs in Labour who other countries will not allow through. I think that's very significant.
Shocking because?
Well, if you look at the reasons why the Israeli government has given for why they're not letting them in, they don't believe that they're going to comply with their laws. MPs do not have diplomatic immunity. I believe that the people who represent us in Parliament should be people who should be able to go anywhere in the world and people not be worried about what they're going to do when they go into those countries.
Are you suggesting the Israelis were right to worry that these 2 Labour politicians would break the law if they got into the country?
Well, that's the reason they gave. And what I believe is that every country should be able to control its borders. We do the same thing. There are many people that we don't allow into our country, and I don't think we should be setting precedents in a different way.
So just to be clear, you believe the Israeli government's account of this, not the Foreign Secretary who says they were treated unacceptably?
The Foreign Secretary has given his view. I've given my view.
That was so deeply cynical. You can see what she's done, right? You can see her strategists have said, oh, actually, maybe we can use this to our advantage because we like to call the Labour Party extremists. We like to say they're sort of pro-Palestinian, anti-Semitic Hamas supporters, right? This is what the Tory party like to say about the Labour Party, or anyone to the left of Tony Blair. And she thinks that actually maybe we can say, the only reason they could have possibly been deported from Israel is because they're so extreme that it should be embarrassing for Labour. This should be a story that embarrasses the Labour Party. Now, thankfully, I don't think many people in this country have read this story in that light. And Labour MP and former Shadow Attorney General Emily Thornberry has come out quite strongly against Badenoch. She was also on the Laura Kuenssberg show with these pretty strong words.
Quite
So
horrified,
I
I
know
have to say.
Absam Mohammed, and I know Yang very well. I know Absam particularly because she's a member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. And these are two young women who are potential leaders. I mean, people listen to what they say. They are highly respected parliamentarians, and Israel is badly advised to try to alienate them, to humiliate them, and to treat them in this way. Because people listen to what these two young women say, and they will do for decades to come. And in my view, Israel really needs to start making friends as opposed to alienating people in this way. I think that it's an insult to Britain, and I think it's an insult to Parliament. I am outraged, and I cannot believe that the leader of the opposition would simply take on the face of it what it is that the Israelis say, because we know that there are times when the Israelis say what the Israelis say first time isn't what they say when they've had a chance to think about it. All we have to think about at the moment is the way in which those people arriving at the scene in ambulances were shot, and the first description and explanation that the Israelis gave, and now they're going back on it.
What Thornberry is referring to there is the killing by Israeli soldiers of 15 first responders in southern Gaza late last month. So the bodies of the rescue workers, including 8 medics working from the Red Crescent, were dumped in a mass grave near Rafah. They were only discovered after a second convoy went in search of the crews after they vanished while out on a mission days before. Now, reports from a doctor as well as members of the second convoy describe some of the bodies with their hands tied, as well as having gunshot wounds to the head and chest. Israel's first response to the killings was to lie, with the military issuing this statement. Several vehicles were identified advancing suspiciously towards IDF troops without headlights or emergency signals. Their movement was not coordinated in advance. Thus, IDF troops opened fire at the suspected vehicles. Following an initial assessment, it was determined that the forces had eliminated a Hamas military operative, Mohammed Amin Ibrahim Shubaki, along with 8 other terrorists from Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. So, according to the IDF, those killed were fighters from Gaza. I just want to point out some other details in that statement. The IDF claimed the rescue vehicles were suspicious, that their headlights were off, and that there were no emergency lights or signals. Now, that has all been shown to be complete rubbish, complete fabrication. And that was after this footage was retrieved from the phone of one of the ambulance workers who was killed. So you can see the ambulances traveling in convoy, their emergency lights flashing and their headlights on. Up ahead, the front vehicles suddenly come to a stop and pull over to the side of the road. As the rear vehicle catches up, you can see ambulance workers in high-vis emergency vests emerging from the vans. You can't hear it here, but the workers filming the scene says, "I hope they're okay." He then adds, "There they are, they're lying around scattered everywhere." The driver says, "Quick, it looks like an accident," and they leave the vehicle. Then the gunfire begins, and it goes on for almost 5 minutes before the video cuts out. The Israeli ministry has now said they are investigating the incident. So that's what they always do. An atrocity is committed by the Israelis. They say, "Oh no, that can't possibly have happened." Video evidence emerges, and then they say, "Oh, okay, we'll do an investigation." I'm speaking to Sky News. Israeli spokesperson David Mencer tried to give this justification for what looks like a massacre.
It is a matter of public record that Hamas have on many occasions, many documented occasions, used ambulances as a cover. What sort of cover? To transport terrorists, to escape from Israel's forces, abusing the very notion of emergency services. Just like the boy that cried wolf in Aesop's fables, Hamas have been abusing emergency services, and that is the real essence of this issue.
That is the real essence of this issue. So they kill medics, they lie about it, they get found out, and they say, oh, it was Hamas. Ash, there's lots to comment on here. We've sort of got two stories in one. We've got this shocking issue of Israel killing medics, lying about it and getting found out. And we then also got the issue of, I think, Badenoch, that was just a political misstep as well as an ethical one, sort of saying, Israel must have been right to deport these Labour MPs.
I mean, look, just to go back to David Mensa, I mean, I think you were being really uncharitable towards him, Michael. It's very simple. It's very, very simple. When Palestinians are killed by Israel, it's always their fault, right? Because either they're Hamas fighters, or they could have been Hamas fighters, or they knew some Hamas fighters, or maybe there were Hamas fighters near them once upon a time, or, maybe they just made those men in Kevlar with, machine guns feel a bit threatened. Maybe that kid threw some stones. Maybe they were Palestinians who were very rudely, I might add, still having the temerity to live within 1967 borders, not realizing there were some illegal Israeli settlers who would really like their house. It's always the fault of Palestinians when they're killed. And when it comes to somebody, whether it's, David Mensa or any one of Israel's spokespeople, I mean, it's the same talking point every time. They may as well just get an AI to do it. What's the point in paying all these different individuals to do the job? The thing that disgusts me the most isn't them saying what they're saying, because it's predictable and it's the same every time. It's the fact that journalists still play this game of, okay, well, we're going to have to take you seriously because that's called balance. You know what this man is going to say before he opens his mouth. You know what the talking points are. Israel bombs a hospital. Well, it's a Hamas control center. Oh, it turns out there's no evidence to suggest it's a Hamas control center. Well, it could have been a Hamas control center. Right? The story is the same every time. Maybe start from a different place. Maybe start with, this is what you're going to say. Why should I believe you this time when it's been false all these others? Right? That is the line of questioning that a self-respecting journalist should take, not because it's in support of the Palestinian cause, but because it's in support of the truth. And because when you have a liar coming back telling you the same falsehood again and again and again, it's on you. You are facilitating that and enabling that when you say, well, let me allow you to give you the space to say the same shit, the 55th time. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say is about, I guess, Kemi Badenoch and Labour. Of course, it's a miscalculation and a moral abomination for Kemi Badenoch to take the side of Israel against elected politicians from the UK. But to be honest with you, it's Labour who've got the humiliation kink. That this is on them. Keir Starmer's government, and Emily Thornberry in particular, provided essential diplomatic cover for Israel following October 7th, basically saying, you are allowed to punish the civilian population. They didn't say it with those words, but that was the meaning of what they said when they said you can cut off water and fuel and all the rest of it. Israel has the right to defend herself, when what we can see is indiscriminate carpet bombing of densely populated civilian areas. So don't embolden a genocidal war and normalize a relationship with an increasingly fascistic state. You've got David Lammy, grinning like a goose, shaking hands with, every Israeli war criminal he can get in his eye line, and then come crying to the British media when this, rogue government is treating your representatives with the disdain that they have for absolutely everybody. This is your baby. You suckled it. You nurtured it. Don't be surprised when it grows into a man doing the exact I look at, Emily Thornberry saying, oh, Israel is very badly advised. This is the fruits of your labor. This is the fruits of your labor. It can't have been nice for those two Labour MPs. I'm sure they weren't deserving of that treatment. I don't think they were deserving of that treatment. But for Labour ministers to come out wagging their fingers, which is always what they do. Oh, no, naughty Israel. You can't kick our MPs out. Oh, no, naughty Israel. You can't launch the Rafah offensive. Oh, no, naughty Israel. You really must let some aid trucks through. You have no leverage because you've made it very clear you're not going to use it, right? You've made it very, very clear that you're going to maintain the sale of F-35 components. You made it very, very clear that you're going to keep giving Israel diplomatic cover, and you've made it very, very clear that you're not going to break with the US on this issue. So,
British prosecutors have been handed a 240-page dossier outlining war crimes committed in Gaza. Now, you might think, we already know about the countless war crimes that Israel has inflicted on Palestinians in the enclave. This dossier, though, isn't about Israelis. It's about British nationals, 10 of them to be exact, who are being accused of breaking international law while fighting in the Strip. Now, their alleged crimes range from the targeted killings of civilians and aid workers, including by sniper fire, to indiscriminate attacks on civilian areas, including hospitals. And the case has been built by a group of British human rights lawyers and researchers from The Hague. Now, one of those lawyers is Michael Mansfield, who's best known for his work representing the victims of the Grenfell Tower fire, the family of Stephen Lawrence and the Birmingham Six. And he spoke to Novara Media outside New Scotland Yard after submitting the file, where he had this message for any other British nationals thinking of fighting for Israel.
I think it's a message to anyone, British national or dual national, that before you sign up to an army, do ensure that the army is conducting itself lawfully and you're not participating in unlawful acts against international law, particularly war crimes. There are obvious ones like murder, extermination, displacement, and so on. And I think that's, you not only have to, that's the message, you have to think carefully. That's not to say you don't, but I'd like to just point out a large number of Israeli soldiers have refused to serve. They're called the refusers. So they've decided they don't want to be part of an army that is committing potentially plausible genocide.
The report has been submitted on behalf of the Gaza-based Palestinian Centre for Human Rights and the British-based Public Interest Law Centre. It covers offences allegedly committed in the territory from October 2023 to May 2024. According to the report, each of the crimes attributed to the suspects, some of whom are dual nationals, amounts to a war crime or crime against humanity. Raji Sarani is director of the Palestinian Centre for Human Rights and told Novara what he hoped the report would achieve.
We want to make sure that the British Police Prosecutor Office cannot claim they don't know. It's their legal obligation to follow any who violate the law, including UK citizens. UK citizens in Gaza doing war crimes against humanity, and they are part of the genocide. And they should be held accountable. We provided enough evidence for the Scotland Yard, to look after them, and we hope that they deliver by holding accountable these people. Israel will not dare to do genocide if they feel they can be held accountable. UK is not doing its obligation, whether here against the British citizens or against the Israeli genociders, and they are not supporting ICC prosecutor, and they are not supporting ICC provisional decisions. So it's about time for UK to have rule of law for Palestine, not the rule of jungle.
Novara also spoke to barrister Sean Summerfield. He took part in compiling the dossier of crimes allegedly committed by the 10 British nationals in Gaza. He detailed some of those crimes to Novara.
It's the spectrum of war crimes and crimes against humanity. There's an enumerated list of war crimes, and it includes everything from murder to forced displacement to consecration of particular sites. The evidence we submit is clear, and the next steps now are for the Metropolitan Police to investigate. War crimes, crimes against humanity, are some of the gravest crimes it's possible to commit as a human being. And so there is now an obligation on the Met Police to investigate, because those crimes are a part of domestic legislation. They're crimes in England and Wales. And now there's that obligation on them. We want to see them investigate the material that we've submitted, conduct their own investigations using the tools at their disposal, with a view, if the evidence is there, and we suggest that it is, to apply for arrest warrants, and ultimately with an eye on prosecutions.
Now, British law means we can't bring you the full contents of the dossier, but Novara's Harriet Williamson has reported these excerpts from witness statements to the case in her article on the Brits accused of war crimes. I could not bear what I saw, dead bodies scattered next to each other, an anonymised witness said in testimony collected by the PCHR. The witness recalled removing a blanket from the dead to find, quote, the bodies of my uncle and his son, my nephews and my brother-in-law, along with other displaced people's bodies. Another witness said soldiers, quote, ordered my father, husband and children to strip, and they were taken one by one into the middle of the glass-strewn living room, where a soldier beat them with an electric cable and a large billiard stick. It goes on, at a medical facility, a third witness said they saw corpses scattered on the ground, especially in the middle of the hospital courtyard, where many dead bodies were buried in a mass grave. A bulldozer ran over a dead body in a horrific and heart-wrenching scene, desecrating the dead, the witness recalled. And they also said a bulldozer demolished part of the hospital. As I say, for legal reasons, the names of the British nationals being accused of war crimes have not been released. Novara, though, understands they include officer-level individuals in the IDF. So what are the precedents here? And when it comes to British nationals fighting abroad and committing potential war crimes? Well, when Russia invaded Ukraine, the UK government issued this warning to British nationals. So it says, British nationals fighting in Ukraine, if you travel to Ukraine to fight or to assist others engaged in the war, your activities may amount to offences under UK legislation. You could be prosecuted on your return to the UK. Now, oddly, British nationals who want to go and fight for Israel have received no similar warning. And despite apparently endless evidence of war crimes having been committed by Israel in Gaza, the British government has continually failed to impose meaningful sanctions on the country. Independent MP Ayub Khan, who is supporting the case against the 10 Brits, gave Novara his views on the government's lack of action.
I'm a lawyer, and I know Keir Starmer is, I'd like to use the word allegedly a lawyer, but he's a lawyer, humanitarian lawyer. So and he's worked for the DPP. And so he understands the principles of evidence and criminality, all of those issues which would have been second nature to him. You'd expect people that are professionals in law, including Mr. Lamy, take those bold steps because they can see what's taking place. And to run a narrative which is entirely disingenuous, I see the British public see what's happening, streamlined, on a daily basis. And for leaders to just shy away and not implement the sanctions that are necessary is a shame on the British system, full stop.
Ash, I mean, neither of us are legal experts. I'm not going to give my sort of take on how this case will proceed. I mean, I suppose one thing that does stand out to me is sort of the difference here between how the government have treated this conflict or war or genocide and how they've treated other ones. You hear so sort of little criticism of people going to fight for the IDF, even though the knowledge of what the IDF are doing is just out there for all to see. And what do you think is the significance of this?
There are limits to what we can say about this case legally, but I can talk about the politics of it. Because one of the things that Israel's advocates very often say when they're trying to, weasel out of accountability for what Israel is actually doing is that they say, why don't you hold other countries to the same standard you're holding Israel to? Why don't you talk about this country, this country, this country? Where there are human rights abuses or, ethnic cleansing or genocides which have been carried out. And the first thing is that very often are protesting about those countries. It's just as Israel's advocates choose not to see it. But the second thing is that Israel seems to have singularly preferential treatment from our government and from the government of the United States. I cannot think of another country which has the same relationship, has the same leeway for British citizens and American citizens to go and fight in their army, which demands more in the way of military aid and commits graver human rights abuses with that military aid. I can't think of another country with that sort of preferential treatment. And I think this goes to the heart of how this case may be received by our political leaders, which is, well, if we start to hold British citizens accountable for allegedly carrying out war crimes in Gaza, well, then you have to start looking at the permissive climate created by British politicians themselves. I've talked already about the comments made by Keir Starmer and Emily Thornberry giving Israel the green light to cut off water, fuel, food, medicines, key aid to Gaza at the beginning of the war. Their insistence on Israel's right to self-defense, though, of course, there is no legal right to defend yourself when you're the occupying power. And also, I think that when you're bombing hospitals, refugee camps, and opening fire on citizens and sniping children, it is clearly not self-defense. So the minute you start opening the box of what have British citizens done abroad in Gaza, well, then you have to start looking at what is it that British politicians have done to enable what's been done in Gaza. So it's in nobody in Westminster's interest to take these allegations particularly seriously, because then they're in the frame as well.
Quite. So obviously they're not implicated if an MP has been kicked out of the West Bank, which is terrible, by the way. It's I don't want to sort of belittle the significance of that, but Labour aren't implicated in that, so they can come out sort of saying this is awful. But if they come out saying Israel is committing war crimes, as you say, they're implicated, which is why we don't hear so much about it. On this story, I mentioned Harriet Williamson's report. If you want to read more about the 10 Brits accused of war crimes in Gaza, you can find her article on novaramedia.com, and we put the link to that in the description below. Let's end there. Thank you so much for joining me, Ash. Been great to spend an hour with you, the first time we've done so in a while.
It feels so good to be reunited. Just want to say, Harriet Williamson, who wrote that article, has also done some brilliant reporting for us over the last few weeks. There's a great article about the Priory, how they're stinging the NHS, costing us up to £800 a night. And that's on the NHS's money, and patients aren't getting the therapy that they need. So she's really one to watch, I think, in the Novara media family.
in the Novara multiverse. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Come back tomorrow for another live show at 6 p.m. Until then, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.